Usually I like to give credit to libertarians for having a little bit of intellect. I mean, just really a little bit, but a little bit. Not a lot. You can often find a crumb of wisdom in their babbling every once.
Well, hello everyone, how are you doing? We do have the Lucy Cam going on, and I tried to plan the show for after the LP Alliance show was done. Did not want to do a show at the same time, but apparently, oh, let me check, make sure I don't have any lipstick on my teeth like usual. Not usually have lipstick, but me usually being paranoid at the beginning that I have lipstick, but apparently the LNC meeting's still going. Well, I can only stay so late. So for those of you just here for the Matt Walsh stuff, I have to do a little Libertarian Party inside baseball for a minute. So I just saw on the list how an LNC member declared that censures are lame. It is so funny the way the self-inflicted wounds that are being done. So was the censure of Angela McArdle lame? Or is it just certain people that it's lame for? Inquiring minds want to know. We all know. Okay, everyone. So I'd like to thank my sponsor before we get started on the Matt Walsh and on the Matt Walsh. This is from Sean Dempsey. You know I love Sean. You know he's a prolific author, and this is a fiction story based upon the Uvalde tragedy. He gave me a hard copy, so be jealous. You can pick it up on Amazon, and he's been a long-time supporter of this show. So I would really appreciate it if you would show him some love. Let me put this up here. If you'd like to show me some love, you can become a patron, just like Sean, at patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. If you would like me to advertise your Liberty product, project, message, whatever it might be, my top tier sponsors do get that, and I would really appreciate it. And you can follow me on Twitter up top there, Karen Ann Harlos, and of course during the show, super chats, and after the show, super thanks always matter. And that's really what keeps the show going. I love the way everyone loves to read about being YouTube monetized. Like I've told people before, if I make $2 in ad revenue a month, considering this is pretty niche and my shows tend to not be those quick and punchy things because I like to get into things in depth, well, you could go ahead and read about the $2. So Matt did a really interesting show. I'm not going to call it an enjoyable show, but I will call it an interesting show because it really encapsulated to me the difference between today's, and he calls himself right-wing, not conservative. So we are, at least in the show, so we are going to use his terminology of right-wing. There are so many people claiming today to be right-wing libertarians. I'm sorry, there isn't such a thing. Now, you might be a more conservative libertarian in your personal social views, but you cannot be a right-wing libertarian. Richard Brown put on that he wished I'd wait till the LNC meeting is over. This LNC term is over as far as I'm concerned. I don't do my schedules around them. I was trying to be courteous to LP Alliance because those are people that I support, and I didn't want to be doing a stream at the same time as them, but I also have to sleep. But I could give a flying fig about what the LNC is doing. Anyway, wish I could say I was there. No, I don't. Okay, so Matt, in describing himself as right-wing, to me, perfectly, that's the word I'm looking for, encapsulated again the difference on why the line that is libertarianism and the line that is right wing do not intersect. And he really made that clear. And there's kind of two topics, and I was going to do it as two shows, but he keeps referencing the other one in the second one, so it just wasn't going to work. This is going to be a longer show. So he started talking about why he changed his position on flag burning. He used to think that that shouldn't be illegal, and he's changed his mind, and he talks about that. And there are some things I agree with him on, not on the fact that it should be illegal, but on the fact that such a big deal was made about him changing his mind. If you have never changed your mind on something, you're probably, I can't think of the correct word, but that's not something necessarily to be proud of. But what he's changed his mind to is worse. But I'm not going to dunk on him for changing his mind. I change my mind on things. And this was like 6 years ago. If you don't change your mind on something in 6 years, you're not a thinking person, probably. So we're going to go from the flag burning thing. But then he's going to really go into explaining his philosophy. Some people are going to be offended, oh, big surprise, on what I have to say. I'll front load it with this so you can see where I'm going, but get ready. Some people, and I'm not wearing pearls, but you're going to clutch your pearls. Being a parent, the fact that you were able to procreate and chose to, does not give you special rights over other people. We keep seeing that a lot popping up now in right-wing circles. But I'm sorry, dear heart, it doesn't. Okay, let's go to the first clip, and we're just going to keep talking. And I want to see or hear, well, virtually hear, I guess see is probably the right word, your interaction here, because as I always do these shows, I don't script out anything. I kind of listen to it, and then I give my mostly contemporaneous reaction here. So we're going to go to the first clip.
So I wanted to talk about this briefly. We've been talking about flag burning on the show this week after Trump's executive order. And I've said that, I agree with Trump. I don't think that burning the flag should be legal. Well, a number of people have taken the opportunity for a gotcha. They really got me. They got me this time, boy. They got me. James Lindsay is one of them when digging through my old tweets and found that back in 2019, I actually had the opposite opinion.
Okay, yeah, that's what I had talked about from the beginning. I do think those gotchas were really, really stupid. If they were done as a gotcha, if they were done more as, oh, you used to have this opinion, and now you have this one, there's really no justification for it. Let me give you an example. He's deceased now, but there was someone by the name of Roy Childs who was instrumental in the founding of the Libertarian Party. And he wrote a famous, infamous letter. It called an open letter to Ayn Rand. Go look it up. It is fantastic, in which he lays the case that you cannot truly believe in the non-aggression principle. And I'm not throwing anyone out of the libertarian camp here, by the way, because in the party pledge that you sign, the primary purpose of that is to assure the government that we're not violent extremists. It isn't as a purity test because no one is exactly pure. So let's just gather. So when I'm saying what I'm going to say next, I'm not kicking anyone out of the libertarian camp. But Roy Childs made the argument to Ayn Rand that you can't truly believe in the non-aggression principle as a philosophical principle unless you're an anarchist. That the whole idea of limited government is, as she said, a floating abstraction. That you cannot have a monopoly on force because that is itself force. It's a great letter. Now, later in his life, kind of like, oh crap, who's the guy? Oh, Nozick. Robert Nozick, who wrote Anarchy, State, and Utopia. Robert Nozick was a hardcore minarchist, like one of my favorite authors. But like Roy Childs, Robert Nozick, they both kind of apostatized later in their life. Like Robert Nozick was arguing for rent control later in his life, and then he seems to have swung back towards more hardcore libertarian at the end. But this isn't about Robert Nozick. I was just giving him as an example. Roy Childs renounced his anarchism before he died. However, but he lived for a while after that. He'd never say why. And I think it was George, crap, I can't remember his last name. He writes for libertarianism.org. But he basically said that he thinks, he can't tell because Roy would never say why, that Roy's reasoning, just kind of like Robert Nozick's, was emotional, and that the new Roy Childs couldn't refute the old Roy Childs. Now, that would be a fair argument to Matt. How do you refute what you used to say before? But the fact is, Matt does give reasons why he changed his mind. George Smith, that's it, Ski2. Thank you so much. I love George Smith. He's a great author. Please don't tell me he apostatized. But Matt does give reasons. You don't have to think they're good reasons, but at least he gives reasons. And that's what we're going to be examining here. So the gotchas were dumb. You could do gotchas on me. People had tried doing gotchas on me where quoting something that I wrote in rationales for a bylaws committee back when I didn't know crap and I hadn't seen as much as I've seen now. I changed my mind on things. So let's go to the next clip. But again, the question is, can you explain why you changed your mind?
And then one of my posts on X about the flag burning thing got community noted. The community noters got to work, and they left this note, which says, Matt Walsh has repeatedly, without equivocation, said burning the flag is protected by the First Amendment and should not be banned. And they linked to 3 old tweets, all from 2019. Now a bunch of people are really enjoying this gotcha. In fact, according to them, this proves that I'm a grifter. A grifter, it's a grift.
Oh, okay. I forget that I have the scene set to change automatically. My Stream Deck's not working. I can't figure out why. Also, my little room, long story, nothing's working today. So yeah, that I'm a community noter, by the way. I'm in that, got qualified for that. Most community notes are completely dumb and I vote them down. For him to say today that he supports flag burning being illegal, you don't community note that with something he said in 2019. That belongs in the comments. People are not static. He changed his mind. And you're really giving him the upper hand here by him being able to very reasonably say, yes, I used to think one thing, now I think another. Here's why. Okay.
Now I'll read my old tweets to you. The ones that they dug up. So this is me back in 2019. 3 of them. The argument that burning the flag isn't protected by the First Amendment because it's offensive and gross seems very similar to the argument that assault rifles aren't protected by the Second Amendment because they're loud and scary. Emotional and irrational arguments. Then I also said, I think burning the flag is stupid and gross, but obviously it's free speech. Free speech doesn't include desecrating a piece of cloth is a really weird position that cannot be intellectually justified. And then finally, I tweeted this in response to Michael Knowles, who I was arguing with on Twitter at the time. But burning the flag doesn't abolish or harm the country in any way. It just makes people very emotionally upset. And speech that makes people very emotionally upset is the only speech that needs to be protected. So that's what I said back in 2019, 6 years ago. And now I'm saying something different. What accounts for the change? Well, I just want to explain this to anyone who's disturbed or confused. And see, what happened is that I changed my mind. I had one opinion, but upon further reflection, I changed my opinion so that it's a different opinion.
Fair point. However, it's still a fair point. what he said in 2019 was exactly right. Is exactly right. And put a pin in that, because that whole example with gun control, I'm not going to play the game, the YouTube game of saying pew pew and all of that. Mostly supported by patrons. If you like that, I don't baby talk you. I know I have sometimes. I've changed my mind. Go figure. Just stick me a super chat. Super appreciate it. Here's what's funny. YouTube will only do a payout when you reach a certain threshold, and I'm like $10 away from that threshold, and it's been sitting there, and I'm like, give me my paycheck. So you can do me a solid. But anyway, his reasons in 2019 were solid. Matt, and he'll go on to say this, he was much more libertarian in 2019, and now he's right-wing. And that's different. And I will say that's a good litmus test right there. If you think burning the American flag should be illegal, you're probably not a libertarian. Doesn't mean you have to like it. Listen, I'm an anarchist. I'm not the fan of any country, and I could tell you I've been to one at Porkfest, and it made me very uncomfortable, even being an anarchist. And I wasn't the one doing it. I just happened to be an observer because they had this huge bonfire. But I will say they also threw like every flag they could fly in there, including what he is going to be bringing up later. They burned a pride flag as well. They burned all the flags. They were an equal opportunity flag burner. And I can tell you the whole thing made me uncomfortable. I just happened to be there. But that is one that's a pretty good litmus test. Maybe not. Maybe you have some emotional reason. You had somebody in the military, things like that. But I'm just saying, in general, I think that's a pretty good litmus test. And damn, those reasons were good in 2019. He expressed them well in 2019.
This week, when I've made the point that burning the flag should be illegal, what was the main reason that I gave? What was my main argument? What did I say on my show and in X posts on the topic this week? Well, I said pretty clearly that in a country where people are prosecuted for desecrating pride flags, in that country, it should be illegal to burn the American flag, because I refuse to live in a country where the symbols of gay pride are more protected than our national flag.
That is a mischaracterization, but I understand where he's coming from, and I'm not going to get into the whole mischaracterization. Let's just pretend he characterized it exactly right. And he's going to deal with the argument I'm going to make now, which is that the answer to injustice is not to equally spread out the injustice. But, and he's going to get into this too, and this really gets into something the Texitarian said in my chat. I'm going to put this up on the screen, and I'm going to read it because it will become related, even though Matt's not going to deal with anarchism. He says, I'm not opposed to anarchism. I just think we have a lot more to learn in terms of how we're going to implement it the right way. Let me just interact with that a second. There is no central planning in anarchism, so there is no right way to implement it. It's chaos theory. I don't mean chaos in the bad thing. I mean, back when the abolitionists were, and I'm not trying to say everything I hate is Hitler or everything I hate is slavery, but nobody really knew how the slave economy was going to be replaced. And I don't think the abolitionists were under any obligation to answer that question, because slavery was just wrong. Even if no one, even if there would never be cotton again, slavery was wrong. Monopolies on force and what the government does is wrong. but I understand your concern, and we're going to start to deal with that. There's a lot of questions I'm sure will be answered as time goes on. Yeah, exactly. Like if I told you how I thought it could happen, it'd probably be exactly opposite. Like I'm surprised by things that go, oh, it can happen that way that I never would have thought of. And there's a great article that I'd like to recommend to people curious. And it's the article that made me an anarchist because I had the same questions. And I'm probably going to say the title a little wrong, but if you search for Stefan Kinsella, famous libertarian, and I think the article is called The Moral Irrelevance of the Impossibility of Anarcho-Libertarianism. And it is really, really great. So I get what you're saying. Yes, I'm a philosophical anarchist. That doesn't mean I live my life every day that way because it's just not possible. It would be a suicide pact. Every single thing in this world has been through the initiation of coercion, the initiation of aggression, the initiation of force, however you want to say it. So you try to do the best you can, but it also doesn't mean that you're a sitting duck. It's also kind of like the people who would get on Ayn Rand's case because she collected her Social Security check when she retired. Well, damn, that shit was forced taken from her. I don't blame her for taking it, whether she could afford not to or not. Like, you know, we don't, and Matt's going to get into this. We don't live in a perfect world. So now you've got to try to understand how you're going to interact. And that's what Matt basically is saying. Oh, let me finish what the Texitarians post. Does that mean I'm not an anarchist in principle? Not at all. It just means I'm a realist about getting there. That's perfectly understandable. And it's going to relate so much to what we're getting with. So Matt basically is saying, but he's going to walk it back, and by the end you'll see it's not true. Well, let's just let him talk. I gave that he's going to start to deal with realism, which, believe it or not, even though like I'm an ideological hard ass, I also realize the world we're living in. For instance, if you go to my Substack, I don't write very much on it, but if you go to my Substack, I talk about an instance where I was libeled. And in a perfectly libertarian society, would that be a legal cause of action? I don't know. I might be changing my mind on that. Some people might be shocked. I might be doing a Matt where I changed my mind on it. But at the time I wrote it, I didn't think that would be a cause of action in a libertarian society. However, it is a cause of action today. And because it is a cause of action today, if somebody's saying terrible things about you and you don't sue them, people assume it's true because why wouldn't you? Whereas if it wasn't a cause of action, people would be more cautious to believe just anything. That is an issue I might be evolving on. No, you can't have property in people's thoughts, but if someone is outright telling provable lies against you or just really recklessly negligent, isn't that some kind of fraud? Particularly when in an anarchist society, for instance, you live or die on your reputation. That's a whole other topic. I haven't settled my thoughts on that yet. I might be evolving on that issue. Okay, next clip.
If we lived, and I said this a few days ago, if we lived in a libertarian, absolutist, free speech utopia, my stance on burning the American flag would probably be different. And I said that this week. But we don't live in that country. We don't. We live in a country where hate speech laws exist. We live in a country where the LGBT pride flag is protected by law.
Again, I think that's a mischaracterization, but that's okay. We're going to go with what he said on its own terms. Let's just say that's all true. So he put the problem before us. We don't live in a perfect world. And these sorts of unjust laws are being enforced. So is the answer to expand government to make these unjust laws more consistent? Now, I'm going to tell you the way I resolved this, and it was my proposal. Obviously, the delegates at convention passed it, but if you like it, you know who to thank. If you hate it, you know who to blame, because it was my proposal. Our platform just used to say, you know, we basically want to get the government out of marriage. But here's the fact. The government isn't out of marriage. And we also had the principle that the government can't discriminate. Private people can, but the government can't. So how do you reconcile, we want the government out of marriage, that's one principle. Government can't discriminate, that's the other principle. So when gay people couldn't get married, that was a form of government discrimination. However, we also didn't think that the government should be involved in marriage. And the way I square that circle, is that the expression? Whatever. Resolve that conflict is to say, for as long as government is involved in the illegitimate practice of licensing marriage, they must issue them to everyone, regardless of sex, gender, or number of participants. The number of participants came from me, if you want to know where that came from. So I think that was the way to handle it. In this circumstance, hate speech. Now, I think he's simplifying it because say you have a community. I don't believe in hate. I'm not defending hate speech laws, by the way, but I am trying to steel man. You have a community of 100 people, and 5 of them are gay, let's just say. There's a big difference between saying something bad about the 95 or getting the 95 to hate the 5. There is a difference there, just like we understand the difference in power differentials, where even though it might be legal for a 50-year-old to date a 20-year-old, it gives us an ick factor for a reason, particularly if that person is, I don't know, say her psychiatrist. We understand power differentials. We should be able to understand that. We're not leftists for understanding that when you're dealing with minority voices. And I don't mean minority as in being black. I mean minority as being in less in number. White people could be a minority in a country that was almost all black. Okay, I mean it by just the simple definition of less in number. So, in that case, the vast majority of people are not going to go out and burn the American flag. And to say because allegedly there's laws against burning the gay pride flag, then we should make it illegal to burn the American flag is, I mean, that's one way you could resolve it. I don't think it's the right way. The right way, which he's going to deal with, is to push for none of it being illegal, rather than extending the aggression to even more people. That's very rarely the answer. But we need to concede as libertarians, it's so difficult. I mean, libertarians make this argument all the time. Even libertarians, those libertarians who are arguing that we can't allow free and open immigration until we get rid of the welfare state, you are making the same argument that Matt Walsh is making, just on a different topic. Well, you know, as long as burning this one thing is illegal, we've got to make burning anything that's similar, that is flaggish, illegal. That's not the answer. But let me more to the point to Matt. So, I don't think Matt thinks all taxation is bad, but libertarians certainly do. So, well, I'm not going to say all libertarians do, but that is, in fact, the hardcore libertarian position. I'm not requiring everyone to be pure. I could show you the very first press release put out by the Libertarian Party. It was entitled, "Libertarians Seek to Abolish All Taxation." So come for me if you want, but you're just coming for the history of the party. So the question often comes up, and libertarians do have different opinions on this. Should churches be taxed? And people go, yes, because everyone else is taxed. And I would say, well, taxation is aggression, and the answer to aggression isn't to spread it out amongst more people. It's to push for not to be, for nobody to be taxed. But I understand the other argument. Now, with flag burning, the answer again isn't to spread the aggression out to more people. This is obviously an expression of free speech. It is a shame if, in fact, there are anywhere in the country, because maybe he's right on laws in some areas of the country. It certainly wasn't the law at the Pork Fest where I saw a pride flag being burned. But say that's the law somewhere. The answer isn't to expand that unjust law. That isn't the answer. And it's all just going to come down to his distaste for the gay pride flag. Well, I can't do that, so I just want to punish other people. I don't think it's a principled answer. But I'm not going to pretend like he doesn't have a scintilla of a point. That's not being fair.
Now, I know the response to this point is that, well, okay, then we should stop prosecuting people for desecrating gay flags. You know, let's have more speech, not less. You know, I've heard that argument. That's an argument that Seth Dillon was making. He's also does not agree with me. And he was making that point. More speech, not less. Let's. So my point is not an argument for making it illegal to burn the American flag, but it is rather an argument for not prosecuting people who desecrate the symbols of gay pride. And I agree. We should stop that. We should stop prosecuting people for desecrating gay pride symbols. But and we should not have hate speech laws. I agree also with that.
Okay. But there's a categorical difference. When you're dealing with something that has control over everyone's lives, like the government, to put them in some kind of protected class is categorically not the same. And thank you for the super chat. From Mike, we're going to make good on that. We'll make good on it again later too, but we're going to give some now. Lucy, Mike sent you a super chat. She goes, yeah, get me some kibble. But I so appreciate it, Mike. And I want to put up Ruben's comment. I'm not going to burn the American flag. I'm not either, by the way. And I'm not like a patriot at all, okay? But it makes me uncomfortable because it's perfectly natural to love your homeland. Since I'm not ready to face the social consequences, I'm not loyal to that flag, though, and I won't rebuke a person for burning a flag. Exactly. That's exactly how I feel. I wouldn't personally do it. You know what's so hard is everything's mirror image, so it's this hand. So where? Let me go here. Here's a scritchy for Punchy. Look how smiley he is. So the government will always have, until it's eliminated, or the state, a monopoly of violence against you at all times and in all ways. The power that the gay rights movement, no matter how much Matt may disagree with them, you see that waning now and in certain administrations it will wax. It is not consistent. And why does it wane or wax? It's because of the power that the government is giving them. So the root source cause of the thing he is complaining about, having some kind of minority group's flag being illegal to burn, who's enforcing that? The government. How can you protest them enforcing that? Not that I would do it, but by burning the flag, the American flag. So he is foreclosing one of the avenues of protest for the very thing that he's opposing. So it's categorically not the same thing. And is it all perfectly clean? No, it's not. He's correct. We don't live in the libertarian utopia. But I think that argument is just monumentally bad and really easy to dismantle, as I just did. And I'm sure you guys can come up with more ways to dismantle it. But here's the thing. He said, if we live in that libertarian utopia, he said, I probably would change my mind. As we get on with the rest of the clips, and again, I told you this is going to be a long show because I wanted to keep him all in context. You'll see, no, he wouldn't. Because Matt is turning into a neo-fascist right before our very eyes. I know a lot of people don't like the F word. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. That's my opinion. I don't say it lightly, and that's why I don't call him a conservative. I use his title of right-wing, and he calls himself far right-wing. Okay, I just use a little bit of a different title. But to call him far right is what he calls himself. Okay, next.
At this moment, when all of that stuff is the reality, do I think that the American flag should have fewer protections than the LGBT flag? No. I'm dealing in reality. Not what ought to be, but what actually is. What really actually is.
But why does, allegedly, the LGBT flag have these extra protections? Because of the government. And what represents the government? The American flag. This is like shooting yourself in the foot, Matt, looking down and going, oh, I have another. That is exactly what that is. Now, hopefully we're going to get into now, and this is what I said people are going to get mad at me on. Having children does not give you special rights. And I think we're getting into that. If we haven't, this will just be a bit premature. On Twitter, you may see where there have been people who have been shamed, and then there's been a backlash about them being shamed. And also with that baseball lady, I think there's a little bit of that too, though her aggression to that father and child was completely unacceptable. But the fact of, but they wanted to give it to a kid, yes, you should be nice and give gifts to children, but there isn't an entitlement to that. I am so sorry that people don't think that the world doesn't revolve around their children. Their world may revolve around their children. And that's the way it should be. But you can't make laws, well, obviously you can, but when I say you can't morally make laws because you think that's the world you want your children to live in, even though other people may think differently. Matt's going to actually say this. Okay. And Texitarian, I used to use that expression as well, too, to say that we're further left than the furthest left on social issues, and we're further right than the furthest right on economic issues, and I've become convinced that it's just not correct. That's libertarianism doesn't fall on that spectrum at all. We're just a different thing, but I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, because I used to say such things myself. And I'm not shaming anyone else for still using that, but I don't use the left-right paradigm at all anymore to describe libertarianism or libertarians or my own beliefs. Okay, let's see if he's getting into the kids thing.
And you can say, well, no, it shouldn't be, because I don't think hate crime laws should exist. But they do exist, though. They do actually exist. And since they exist, they should be applied equally.
You don't apply misery equally. Okay, let's continue.
You know, I mean, try it sometime. Try being a conservative, then having like 6 kids and not turning into a militant right-wing radical.
I can understand your personal views changing for your own life and how you're going to run your own household and your own property depending upon what your life circumstances are. You're a parent, you're not a parent. You're a hippie, you're not a hippie. Whatever it might be. But to turn into a far-right authoritarian means my life circumstances have changed. So all of you have to conform to that. No, we don't, Matt. No, we don't. But of course, that's why libertarians are big believers in private property, because you should be able to conform your own property to that and frequent the property of others who agree with your values. Now, some people might think that is in contradiction to things I've said on Twitter, where I've been very opposed to the neo-fascist white supremacist crap that's been coming out of some people out of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. It's not that I don't think freedom allows you to be that way. It certainly does. But as I've explained in different videos, the Libertarian Party itself has to be somewhat thick. And the darker elements of liberty, which there are, and you're a fool if you don't acknowledge that, libertarian dystopia is in fact a thing. The Libertarian Party has to be as far from that as possible. It's not saying to violently suppress them. It's saying to peacefully and voluntarily disassociate with them. But I think Matt should have that same right too. If he thinks other people are just a bunch of libertine degenerates, he should be able to voluntarily disassociate from them. Problem is, we have such thing as quote-unquote public property and all that, which makes things messy. I get it. We'll get into that.
And now for me, the guiding principle, the core of my agenda, my project, is that, as I said to Tucker when I was on his show a few months ago, I want my children to go to heaven, and I want them to live in a good, healthy, thriving country. If I want to decide whether I support something or not, I ask myself, do I want my children to live in a country where this kind of thing is happening? Is it good for my kids? Is it good for their well-being? That's my first consideration. And it overrides all other considerations. I'll be honest with you. All other considerations.
Notice that. All other considerations. That means your rights. And I can understand on his own property and the way he chooses to raise his children. I get that. But also he slipped in something weird there. He wants his kids to get to heaven. It's like Ron Paul said when he was talking about all drugs should be legal. And he's like, if you're the type of person who thinks drugs are bad and addiction is bad and you want to be productive, is making it legal going to give you an irresistible impulse to go out and be a heroin addict? No. If you raise your kids the way you think is the right way, Matt, you're a Catholic, you believe in free will, they will have the choice. And in fact, a lot of Catholics and a lot of Christians, and I'm not getting into the Calvinist, Arminian debate. By the way, I'm a Molinist. Yeah, I have to be weird on everything. But in most Christian traditions, except for the Reformed Christian tradition, and I won't even say except for, because again, I'm not trying to pigeonhole anyone, but they have the belief that God values the choice, and you don't really have a choice if you don't get to choose between what's good and evil. So it's like, I want the government to impose these laws because they're salvific in some way. That's very Christian nationalist. If your alarm bells didn't go on that, where he's talking about how he thinks the force of government should be ordered, and he brought into that he wants his kids to go to heaven. If that did not ring alarm bells for you, you have not been paying attention to what's going on. But he's going to explain on how the fact that he reproduced means he gets to control your life.
That's why when it comes to something like weed, it's another topic where I've changed my opinion. I've become more right-wing on that. 2018, 2019, I was more libertarian. Okay, let's legalize it. Now my opinion is eradicate it, throw everyone in jail who sells it, get rid of it, ban it everywhere. Okay, that's my opinion now. And why has it changed? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the number one reason is that I don't want my kids to live in a country where they can't walk down the street without smelling the stench of this disgusting stuff and seeing potheads wandering around in a daze everywhere. I don't want my kids to live in that country. I don't want my kids to live in a community where everybody's high and where there's like a smoke shop, a weed shop on every corner. I don't want that country. I don't want that country for my kids.
So in other words, what he wants for his kids get to dictate your rights. Now let's go into this. I don't know where you live, Matt, but I work in downtown Denver, and I don't live there. I would love to live in downtown Denver for a while. I just love the urban life. And yes, it has a lot of problems. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't, but I just think that would be exciting. However, I do work down there, and there's quite a bit of weed down there, and not everyone is walking around like a weed zombie. Now, maybe I'm sure that's hyperbole for effect, but that's not making the case that you're trying to make for restricting everyone else's rights. Same thing could be said about alcohol. Are you also an alcohol prohibitionist, Matt? I think consistency demands that you should be. Now, this is where we get into the issue where we do, in fact, have public property. No, I don't think we should, but we do. And this is going to come as heresy to some other libertarians. I'm showing you my libertarian heresy. I think when you do have public property, that reasonable restrictions can be put into place, that it needs to be used for its intended purpose. And I do believe in such thing as noise pollution and smell pollution and light pollution. Now, where does that begin? That's a community judgment call. And for those of you who think, no, we've got to have black and white rules, well, let me ask you. As libertarians, we believe in the homesteading principle. Exactly. Can you give me an exact equation on how much labor you have to mix with the land and how much land? Or let's do the big straw man. Can you piss into the Atlantic Ocean and say that was your labor, and you claiming you've just homesteaded the entire ocean? No. I do not have a problem with saying in a public walkway that you can't be noxious with your odors. And I actually think that goes for body odor, though, too. It needs to be something that is reasonable for the pleasant experience of people in the public. I don't think that's so hard to comprehend. That also means you can't put tents on the public sidewalk. That doesn't mean you get to outlaw all weed everywhere and eradicate anyone who sells it, is what he said. And no, you can't tell people what they can or cannot sell in a smoke shop. They own that property. They could sell it. You don't need to go into it. But here's Matt's ultra authoritarianism. One thing he said was reasonable. Yes, you shouldn't have to go out everywhere and smell weed. I don't like the smell of weed either. And I live in Colorado, so I smell it quite a bit. I don't think that's unreasonable, particularly since there's ways to consume it that have no odor at all. And I think people who smoke out in public are selfish assholes, because nobody wants to smell that shit. Just like if you done had diarrhea in your drawers, no one wants to smell that shit either, even though you have every right to diarrhea in appropriate places. We're not trying to outlaw diarrhea. But to Matt, it's, do I want this for my kids? If I don't, I get to use violence against you to keep it, to make it illegal. Well then, Matt, why can't a Muslim family, a very fundamentalist Muslim family, say, I do not want my kids to grow up in a world where they see female legs. So we get to violently force all women to cover. Why not? They don't want their kids to grow up in that world. That is their values. This is why you have to have a liberal, and I don't mean it in the American modern sense of the word, in the classical sense of the word, a liberal sense of freedom. Hey, Ruben, and we're almost done, by the way, but you can catch the rest tomorrow. I've only got one more Matt Walsh clip, and then I'd be ready to, I'm ready to, this is why I couldn't wait for the LNC meeting to be over, even though I really wanted to out of courtesy for Kyle and Amanda.
So I want the stuff banned. And you might say, but I have a right to, I want it. Yeah, I don't care. That's why any argument you make is a non-starter for me. I don't care. It's not good for my kids. And I care about them more than I care about you.
And how would he like it, though, if his kids end up growing up in a world? Okay, here's what's funny. That is the same argument. Let's pretend all of his LGBT, whatever, boogeymen were true. Those are the world those folks want their kids to grow up in. So they think they can use violence against you and your far-right values to have to accept it. You're doing the same thing, hypocrite. The exact same thing. I don't care. You want to know what, Matt? I don't care that you think my freedoms aren't the ideal world you want your kids to grow up in. I don't have children myself. And you might go, well, then that gives you no say. That's bullshit, just like it's bullshit that men can't have a say about abortion because they don't have a uterus. They progeny children. They have every right to be a part of the conversation. Everyone has a right to be part of the conversation. I don't want anyone's kids, my sister's children, I don't want anyone's kids to grow up in an unfree, authoritarian world. Now what? This is why privatization is the answer, because both sides are scrambling to pick up Chekhov's gun, and Matt is just salivating to do that now. What's going to happen when the other side of the duopoly is in power, Matt? You're going to get as good as you gave. At some point, everyone's got to put Chekhov's gun down. If you don't understand that analogy, look up past video I did. If I can remember at one point, I'll stick it up here. I think it's called The State and Chekhov's Gun. Okay, everyone, that's it for this evening. Anyone watching this after the fact, super appreciate, super thanks. Or become a patron. Let me stick this up on the screen here. Patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. We did get a new patron last week, which I super appreciate. Okay, that's it. I hope you have a good night. She's already in a Lucy ball here. All right, bye-bye.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business.